Welcome back. This is the first of our weekly videos, and we'll see how long we go. Hopefully I don't intend to stop them for a while, so this should be weekly build videos. And to start off, we've got the Eduard Spitfire Mk.1 from the Spitfire Story boxing, which is a dual combo. So first off, picking the scheme, we're going to do a super early one, 1938, 19 Squadron, large roundels, barely any markings, and straight on with a two-blade propeller. So things begin in the cockpit, and we've got the side walls are separate, and then we've got quite a lot of small parts to add on to those that are in plastic, thankfully, and then we've got a few etch details as well. This kit comes with masks and a full colour photo etch set as well, so there's lots to go on in there. Here we've got the oxygen tanks there that go behind, and then we're just putting on some of the other small details. So I think this is the throttle lever, which goes on there. And the painting is actually split. So we've got some aluminium parts, and we've also got some interior green parts. However, it's not interior green. More on that shortly. And just showing you on the other side, this one is specific to this very early Spitfire boxing. That is the hand pump for the gear retraction that you can see there. And that is specific to early ones. That then was replaced with an automatic one, which actually some of the kit, the markings in this box should have an automatic retraction system, but it's not in the kit. So something to watch out for. For this marking, for this variant, we need to fill this gap on the back of this bulkhead, so just doing that now with some super glue. We'll sand that back later with no issue. And then it's on to the seat. So the first thing I'll say about this kit is the instructions are quite confusing for the different versions of Spitfire that you can do. So here I've made up my nice seat there with the flare rack as it was instructed. However, for this early variant of Spitfire, that's not correct. We should be having the all-metal seat, whereas that one I think is the plastic one, or it's got the cushioned back. So what we're meant to have is a full metal seat. We've got the part in there, so I make up the other chair, but it doesn't have the flare rack, which is the circles at the front there, on the front of the seat. So we just cut that off, glue the sides on, and then we're good to go. And there you can see the seat we're going to be using is on the right-hand side. And all I've done is built up the seat for when I build the next kit, so it's not a problem. Stick it in the box, no worries. But you've got to really research. If you want to be accurate, you've got to go through this and make sure you select the correct parts as you go through. I could have even made some mistakes here. I was just asking a friend who knew more about this than me, but it would have been nice if the instructions clearly called out for each specific part that's for each specific variant. They do it for a number of parts, but they don't do it for all the bits. So we've got a few photo etch parts there going on the bulkhead, and now it's getting the, I would say, the cockpit floor, but it's not really. It's kind of open. There is no real cockpit floor. It's all kind of just sat there with numerous bits of framing underneath you. And this section here is, what I will say again about this build as well, is it's incredibly fiddly. So it's broken down into a lot of different parts, and as you can see, it's very easy to get things misaligned here. So you need to test fit and kind of think your way through the process. It is certainly not one for beginners. It's a complex kit, but everything's there, and there's nothing really of too much issue. Here you can see that we've got a photo etch part there going on for the trigger. I believe that is for the guns, and it's just very, very fiddly. Also the wiring there going for between the two oxygen tanks, again in photo etch. I'm assuming for all of these parts where I'm using photo etch, there's actually plastic parts in the kit, although I didn't see two oxygen bottles, one with the bits, one without it. So presumably you just don't have the photo etch bits if you do a weekend edition. But that's not out yet, so we'll have to wait and see. So this here is one of the grab, it's the kind of grab hook that sticks onto the inside of the movable part of the centre section of the canopy. And that's all a photo etch bit. Very, very fine work, but straightforward enough. Difficult to hold in tweezers. But we get there in the end, and that needs to be sprayed up with the interior colour. That's why I'm making that one now. It's a very delicate part, it's quite nice. We've also got multiple different doors for this one, so you've got to select the right one. This is called out correctly, and here I'm going to add the photo etch, which personally I don't think is needed. I'm just doing this for the sake of the video. So you've got the arm there that releases the door, and I'm just showing you how small the parts are. As you can see here, these two hinges need to go on either side, and then you thread the release lever through it. So it is some tricky work, and that's the bit that you thread between those, and then it kind of moves, but the idea isn't to leave it movable really. So I've got one bracket on, and then kind of glue the other bracket on eventually. I'm just testing it here and putting the lever through, but it works out that it's a lot easier to actually put the two brackets on either side and then push the lever through and open the brackets up a little bit. You can see how fiddly this is. It was a bit tricky, but I don't mind doing it for the sake of the video. But personally, the detail that was already there was fine. This is kind of taking things to a next level, which, you know, you can do. It's nice to have it included and to have the option. And when it's finished there, you can see I went the other way about it, and that then folds over with the circle sticking down out of the door. It shouldn't be like that, it should be facing the other way, but you can just move it over, it's no problem. So next up, I decided to add in the bulkheads. This is deviating a little bit from the instruction sequence, so I do that across the build a little bit. I just felt like it was worth getting all of the parts onto the separate mountings where I could, and then that meant it was easier for spraying. So that's what we're doing now. We're getting ready to spray the interior colour, which for this particular version of Spitfire, I'm reliably informed, hopefully, that we need to use Eau de Nil, I believe it is, or something like that. It's EAU de Nil. It's a colour that's widely used, apparently. People paint their houses in it. It's basically a duck egg blue, really, or duck egg green. It's a strange colour to explain, but what I end up with here with all of this paint mixing is pretty much what I was intending. I kind of get there through all kinds of different colours. This isn't I didn't write the mix down because I didn't really know what the mix was. I just kept kind of mixing stuff together until it kind of looked right. There's not really anything, certainly in the Tamiya range, that is straight out of the bottle. Vallejo do a colour for it. It's like a kind of bluey version of Sky, I guess. Little bit bluer. That's the way to think of it. The RAF Sky. So using an old paint pot here and various colours that match the shade, and we've got a kind of apple green in there because that comes through in the colour as well. It's starting to look right. I would have put a colour swatch up, but each one is so different, it's hard to know which one we're going for. I knew the colour I was after, but I couldn't really find anything. And I've got one there on my phone, which isn't quite right at all. That's not what I'm aiming for either, but you'll see when we actually spray it up, it starts to look the part. And now it's time to spray it. So I've already sprayed up the silver bits and masked them off, so that's the aluminium colour, and I've used Mr. Colour 8 for that, which is an excellent silver colour straight out of the bottle. And that is my test spray of the colour that we mixed. So that's what I'm on about. It's kind of like a cockpit green, but it's a bit different. I mean, each to their own. You might think that looks just like the cockpit green that you use, and that's fair enough, but I thought I'd attempt it. So I've got all the bits there on my trusty milk bottle lids with a bit of white tack on there, and just press them in, and that leaves it all free for spraying. Because there is lacquer as well as Tamiya acrylic and everything in there, it's all fine. It all cuts well with cellulose thinners, so I'm using the Mr. Leveling thinners there in the colour cup. The oxygen bottle seems to be called out for a kind of weird grey colour, and then I've obviously sprayed all of the black parts as well in the for the cockpit. Ready for that, and that's using MRP black, so it's because it's already got a glossy feel. And this here, I actually add that to the green colour, some X22, to give it a bit of a glossy finish to it. It's more satin, I suppose. It's because there was some gloss and some matte paint in there, and adding this gloss just means that it'll bring it to a level that I'm happy with, and it'll make it more of a sensible colour. So I'll leave you there with a bit of spraying, just show you how we go about that, just lightly doing it. This is with a 0.5 needle. So jumping back in, I've got a few parts together there on the side wall, and I've actually got one of the Eduard decals in there now, and this is the first attempt that I've done with this of peeling off the carrier film, which is something they're meant to be able to do. And there you go, peeled away. And this is something that we find out later, unfortunately, but that'll be in next week's video, is some of them do pull the decal away, especially if you don't get it pushed down thoroughly. And there you can see there's a little bit of that left at the bottom. It's not an issue here, but if that was a roundel, there'd be a fair chunk out of it missing. So you've got to make sure the decal is properly pushed down onto the surface and it's really adhered. So you want to use all of your setting solutions, the ones that add and help the glue, and make sure it's bonded on and press it right on. And there you can see all the basic colours now, black added in, everything's looking pretty good, and just getting ready for the weathering really. Going to keep things very, very light. This is a clean bird, a very early bird. It's not been flown lots, it's not got a lot of hours on the clock, so we're not weathering this very much at all, and that's all the way through the build. So the cockpit's kept a little bit clean, and the weathering at the end is going to be pretty clean. I'm trying to pull that off. Hopefully, it's not an easy thing to do. But hopefully I get it right. And just test fitting there now. You can see I've taken the rear bulkhead off because it wasn't really working for me. So it did. The reason I put it there, it's was to spray it. So we did that. But now it's off, and we're going to add it back in towards the end. So we've got a few photo etch parts to add on now. That's some sort of lever. I'm not actually sure what it's for, but it's a very delicate part. I'm just adding that on. And it works quite well, and we've brush painted quite a lot of the areas as well. Now this is quite an interesting aspect to the included photo etch. It's very, very nice harnesses here, replicating the Sutton harness, and it's in two parts because this part here that you can see folds back on itself after it's glued to the main harness. So you just want to line that up. I'm a little bit high there. These silver lines on the main harness are meant to be in the middle of that buckle. I seem to have got my eye out here a little bit, but nevertheless it all comes good in the end. And when they are fixed to the seat, it's quite complicated if you don't know what you're trying to do, because if you read the instructions it doesn't look right, but the rear section basically folds back over the seat and gets glued on the back, but we'll show you that a little bit later. I saw a few builds on Facebook where people had got that a little bit wrong, so we'll return to that. Another nice feature of this kit is the included photo etch instrument panel, although I must admit that I actually prefer the Eduard included raised bezel plastic version of the instrument panel, and using their decal and adding that over and setting that in, and then using PVA glue to give you some dials. I'm using this really to show in the video. That's how I generally like to do it on the Eduard kits, because they don't tend to get even here you get kind of a rough texture over the front of the instrument panel, and they can't seem to get away from that unless you buy one of their new resin ones that are much better. Yahoo instrument panels seem to be quite a bit better as well. But this is, like I said, for the sake of the video, we're building this kit as it is out the box. So, you know, plough on regardless. I'm just using PVA glue here from Deluxe Materials to get that bond in and let it spread around. This gives you a bit more movement. If you use super glue, as you can see, I've just dropped it. If I drop that with instant super glue, it might have stuck then, and then it's a real pain to get it off. So that's how I like to go about with those. Now we're getting ready for just a little bit of weathering inside the cockpit. I'm just getting my oils lined up here, and this looks excessive. I was doing a little bit of weathering for another project at the same time, so you don't need to use quite as much of this oil paint all the way through. But there we got our well-used mixing cup. I'm just putting in some of the odorless thinners there and ready to go. The reason we put it on kitchen towel, as you can see, certainly on this green at the bottom of the camera, it wicks out the linseed oil, which if you get rid of that, it tends to make the oil paint dry a lot quicker. If you leave the linseed oil in, it can be a few days, up to 2 or 3 days. If you take the linseed oil out, it tends to dry overnight or after a few hours. Not that that's really a problem anyway. As far as oils are concerned, I don't tend to wait for them to dry. Give them an hour and then just plough on regardless. So I'll leave you here. This is reasonably self-explanatory, so you see what I do here with the weathering. All quite simple stuff, and just trying to keep everything nice and clean, but just to add a bit of definition. So once the weathering's finished, I want to seal that in now and give it a flat coat. So that's what we've got here, using GX113 from the Mr. Colour range. And that's thinned with some Mr. Leveling Colour. I tend to use rapid thinners sometimes, but I've actually used the leveling thinners, which is it takes a little bit longer. You see the nice finish it gives. Not dead flat, a little bit of life in there still, but it seals the oils in and means that we don't get fingerprints in the oil paint that you would, because it stays live for quite a while. Just a little bit of depth, a little bit of grime, a little bit of build up here and there, but nothing excessive. I've added in the PVA glue there in the dials to give us a glass look on the instrument panel. And now it's the seat belts that I mentioned earlier. So this is how they're meant to be attached to the seat. They kind of go past the hole on the back and they sit just below where that hole is, bending over the top of the seat, and then you can see that the main harnesses then go right up and over and in towards the back of the airframe. So that's something I've noticed people get slightly wrong on some builds that I've seen so far, so just something to watch out for. The instructions do not help you in explaining this, and I actually glued those harnesses incorrectly 2 or 3 times before I worked out how it's meant to go. And that's what it's meant to look like, pulling back through there with that other part going down the back of the seat. That was my understanding of it anyway, so if you think that it should be any different, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to take it on board. And we're really getting to the end of the cockpit now, so just adding in a few final details where we've got the rudder pedals and the loops. Oh, there again, photo etch loops there to kind of footholds, I guess, canvas loops. It's a very tricky way of adding those in. I've got to be honest, it's not straightforward at all. And this is what I'm saying. I'm not sure that they needed to be left as single parts, but there you go. It is a complex build, but just take your time and everything will make sense. This is another thing that was lost on me at the time. This here is actually where the landing gear leg goes. So you want to make sure that is glued correctly. Mine was a little bit off, to be honest, and I had to pay for it later. And I've also noticed that some of the parts are mixed up here. I could be wrong here, but I could not make the parts as they are in the instructions fit unless I swap them, and then they fit perfectly. So it's got to be correct. It's got to be right that it's meant to be the other way around. So something to look out for. This is in the gear well assembly, and it's that part there. Now it just does not fit. This part here is meant to be on the... Sorry, no, that's okay. The bit that joins into is meant to be on the other side. If you follow the instructions, but it didn't work for me at all, so I tended to swap them over. And again, a multi-part build-up of the wheel wells here. I'm not so sure it's necessary personally, but it's there and it's extra detail, so that it's fine, but it adds plenty of room for error is my fear. So something to watch out for is this part here, which I'd glued in already and it didn't seem to fit, and it fits perfectly this side, so just something to check. I might have got that wrong, but I made a note of it just in case. And then when it's all, you can see how fiddly it is, but when it's all ready and it's placed in there, it then kind of brings itself all together if you push from every angle, is what I'm trying to say here. So you bring it all in, add the glue on each bit, and it should all pull together nicely then. But bearing in mind that the gear leg goes into this section here where it's hanging off of one of those side walls, it does leave room for error, was my fear. I like a bit of a firmer fixing point, to be honest, when it comes to landing gear. If you take this and compare it with the way Tamiya have done it, you'll see what I mean. And then finishing off the wheel wells, we've got the circular bits going in. So again, this is tricky, but if you take your time and glue one side, then glue the other, it is okay. But I'm just a bit worried about the factoring in of error that they've kind of allowed for here. So my advice through the whole of this build is dry fit. Check all the way through. And if it doesn't fit, don't be scared to think that it might be the kit. That was my understanding. There were certain bits that I just had to change. The wing going on the top there, and we've got the separate wing tips, which I do not like, but I understand that it leaves it open for more variants. This wing joining to the top here, again, has a little bit of room for error, so you've just got to be careful and make sure everything's lined up properly. Some people have mentioned that they've had to sand the tops of the wheel wells down as well. I didn't have to do that here, I didn't find any issue, but it might be something to look out for as well. So here I've glued one sidewall to the fuselage half, and I've left the other side separate so that I can flex the fuselage half about. And I've also only glued the top of the fuselage all the way down the spine and across the nose, but I've not glued any of the sections below, so that I can flex it out here, which was my fear, that there'd be a bit of a dodgy wing root gap. And here you can see where I'm moving it and flexing it, I can get rid of that wing root and get a nice join there. So that was the way I went about it. I wouldn't advise that that's how you have to do it, but it's what I decided to do, because it didn't look right to me at all. It just looked like there was a lot of error, and it's a bit wonky around the front here. I mean, I don't know, I would have felt like it would have been a bit of a stronger fit there, but it seems just a bit vague, is my fear. It does all come together, to be honest. I use a little bit of super glue here and there to pin it, and then fix it all down with Tamiya extra thin, so there is no issue, but something to just watch out for, I would say. And once I finally was happy with how it was all looking, it's time to glue it up. So you just gotta go for it, which is what I'm doing here. And using the quick setting extra thin, move through in sections, gluing bits up here and there, making sure it's okay. Now I've moved to the front, so I've glued that down, but we haven't glued the wing root. And I'm just checking that everything's lined up in the different places, and then I bring the wing root in towards the end. And there I'm just sort of pointing out that there's a lot of places you've got to check. So at the rear, I don't know what you'd call that, sort of at the trailing edge, this part here, it kind of slots in. That natural seam line appears because there's a part towards the back of the fuselage and onto the wing root. The leading edge as well leaves a lot to be desired, so you're meant to have put the guns in at this point, but I haven't. I'm going to put them in at the end. So I've used super glue all the way along the leading edge and filled that line that I pointed out on the front of the nose as well. A few little gaps popping up here and there, like I'm mentioning, so just kind of checking things out and getting ready to get the airframe all fixed up and cleaned and ready to go. Adding a bit of super glue before I start the sanding to try and act as filler, really. It's not held with super glue, it's held with Tamiya extra thin. The super glue is just a filler at this point. And I can report that actually when it's all sanded back, it's not a problem, but it does look a bit iffy at this point. For a brand new kit, it looks a bit sort of... I was a bit worried, to be honest. I did have to go through the sanding sticks, so got all the trusty ones out, and when I was happy that was all blended back, it was time to put on the final parts. So I got all them all off the sprue and ready to attach them here, there and everywhere. We've got the whole tailplane to fix on as well, which is done in a number of ways. So you get the horizontal stabilizers in, and then the actual elevators go on, and then we've got that small part I've just slided in there which holds the elevators in, which I don't know what the reason behind that was. It must have been a reason there, but it was very, very fiddly. We've got the ailerons going on now as well. They're fine, straightforward, very much like the rest of Eduard kits, to be honest. Nothing to report there. The wing tips as well do snap in, but you just want to make sure they're level before you glue them, because you can kind of push them up or push them down. Just make sure it all looks very natural. That was no issue. And there we are, we got the airframe kind of coming together. It certainly looks like a Spitfire now. So a few small details I had to add were left to go. Some I've left off, some I decided to add on. There is an etched metal parachute cutting blade, I think, that goes on the top of the tail underneath the rudder on the top of the fin. And we've got air scoop, oil cooler, something like that. This is one of the worst parts of the kit. Out of the box, nearly every kit that I've seen has these awful sink marks on the very nice exhaust, and unfortunately that is on the top side, so that's the side you see the most. It's not like you can tuck it down underneath. So the way I go about this, just super glue filler to fill up all of those sink marks, sand it back, blend it, and it's pretty smooth, to be honest. By the time we get into the paint, which is in next week's video, you don't notice it. You can't see any of it. It's all gone. So it is a pain. A lot of people rushed out and bought the resin replacements. That's the easy way around it. It's not. If we take, it's two sides to the coin. It's not a big deal if you just fix it, but also it shouldn't be like that. So I see, I'm on both sides. I think it's a bit of a cock up on Eduard's point to have sink marks like that on a brand new kit. So now we've got the oil cooler, something like that. Not too good on the undersides of Spitfires. Then we've got this part as well, which I think is the radiator, which is a multi-part build-up of this, and it is incredibly complex and, dare I say, a little bit over-engineered. This footage here was about 10 minutes, so I've cut it right down, so you only see about 30 seconds of it, but it took forever to get this all line up correctly. But finally there now, and I just sand those edges down to blend it. Again, you can see you can push it in too far and then you'll get a step, so you want to avoid that. Then the two-blade prop, which is in two parts with the rear of it as well. All goes together okay, really. I mean, you've got to kind of put it together in a way that it tacks itself so it holds itself together, because it is a bit awkward, and then just push the back plate in and get it all settled in after that, really. I was worried that there'd be a seam line and something to worry about on the blades, but they've handled it very well. It's pretty tight. I didn't have to sand any of this. I didn't notice any line that I felt was needed to be dealt with. And then the cap going on there to bring it off and finish it as a wooden propeller, two-bladed propeller. So there we go. That brings this part of this build to an end. So this is episode 1, part 1 of 2. So next week we'll have the aircraft completely finished. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. If you like the channel and you want to help support me, there is a couple of links down below. There's a PayPal link and also a link to Patreon, where we've got a couple of tiers now, and a few little things are starting to come out where you can get a few extras, maybe some early videos and that. I'm just kind of working on that at the minute. So if you like the channel and you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If you like the video, please give it a like. It would be great to hear your comments down below. If you want to support the channel, those links, as I said, would be very helpful. And stay tuned to the channel, because next week we've got part 2 and we bring this one to an end and we get the colour on, get it weathered, and show you the final reveal.